welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast, brought to you in association with our friends at Soccer Coach Weekly, reflecting our shared ambition to help coaches have the most effective, enjoyable and successful coaching journey for them and their players. We hope you enjoyed this episode and thanks for listening. Ray, my friend, how are we?
I'm well, Scott. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm very good, and I'm excited about this episode. I'm in
Sure.
love with
Well,
one of the questions. I'm in love with all three of the questions, but there's like all three are brilliant. But there's one I'm like, oh, we could so go on like for probably 4 hours on that one alone. So, but firstly, yeah, how are things? How
yeah,
is the World Cup going?
it's been the World Cup, we're now in kind of, there's no game on today. That kind of phase, and it felt like it lasted ages where there was games every day. So yeah, it's been brilliant. I think it's been brilliant. Do you know what I mean? Regardless of who you're supporting and all that sort of stuff, there's nothing like it, is there? There's nothing like
No, there's nothing
game
like
after game after
you
game
know.
and narratives and all that sort of stuff. I'm a little bit. I don't like when kind of public narrative goes around like match fixing and cheating and all that sort of stuff. That kind of annoys me because I just find it really. I'm not FIFA's puppet or anything like that, but I just find them just a little bit cringy and baseless and stuff like that. I don't like that because I think it damages the game. The people who, maybe the casual people who come into a World Cup and kind of detach after it, I think it makes it look poor. But yeah, the games themselves, the the teams on show. I keep thinking back to our conversation with John and right at the start, and
Yeah,
I bet he's quite happy to have a couple of days off. To be fair, from analysing all those games.
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
all good, all good.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. It's been great. Yeah, it's been good. I think like, and a lot of countries have had their moments, haven't they, in different ways, relatively to their circumstances. So it's been great to kind of keep things going. There has been like the exciting matches that get someone interested. So, yeah, and it's crunch time now. So we'll see how the next few days go, and then
Yeah.
not long till the final. Okay, well,
Listening then as well, we are recording before the final, so this might go out and probably will go out, and we will know who champions are. So we're before the semi-finals. So
well, now you got me thinking, do we put our next in line and go? That's four teams. I had Brazil. I don't know why I had Brazil, but I had Brazil, I think, at the beginning, so that was a mistake. Um, do we put a nickel along on that and go for it, or are we going to just? I don't know. I
go
wouldn't.
on then. Like, for me, and nobody is going to give me any kudos for saying France at this point. I did say before the tournament, but even then they were the favourites anyway. They've got the best players, I think. People have moaned about Spain a little bit and said they haven't quite been at it, but I always like Spain. I think that's exactly what Spain do. So I think that's going to be a really good matchup tonight, and it's hard. I think it's hard to call any of the games now.
Yeah,
You would give France the edge because they've got better players, and there's an argument. There's, even with Messi, Argentina might be sort of individually the poorest, but they're so good as a group, and
yeah,
that's, like, I can't call either semi final with any sort of clarity. But if France won 3-0, you'd be like, okay, or you know what I mean,
yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. But that's why we love it, isn't it? So I send out this morning. My members get a tactical cam video every month, and I had to send them out Spain v France from the Euros, just because the kind of contrast in how they play is wonderful to see from that angle as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
and probably by the time anyone else has listened to this, Scott, the narrative's already been written, and maybe we're both
Yeah.
totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, that's how a semi-final should be, isn't it? You shouldn't be able to call it. It should be like, who knows on their day. I mean, it's hard to see past France, if they're at it, but it could be Spain, England. It could be France, Argentina. It could be, who knows? So we'll see. But that's what, like I say, that's what keeps it exciting. So, as long as it just goes down to the football and no nonsense, then that's all you care about. A good game, all about the football, and then we can go from there. All right, brilliant. Well, look, we've had some great episodes recently, really good stuff. And Ray, this is mostly down to your wonderful work behind the scenes, so I can claim no credit for that. But what you've organised with the guests we've had on, it was great doing the parents one. Went out recently, but a couple of weeks back we recorded that one with a great round table of guests. We've had some brilliant guests on individually. We've had some good collective stuff on, and we've done a previous episode where we've done coaches' questions, and that is going to be today's one again. So you've managed to reach out to your coaching community, and I think you've got three brilliant questions. Like I said, all three are fantastic. And I got my head racing. I think two of them I'm probably not as afraid to answer on as you are. So I'm great you're here, but I will do my best. But one I definitely got my views on, so I'll keep my teeth into that.
But
Um,
let's
so
do it.
I'll just outline quickly what the questions are, and then before we get into them, just so people who are listening can either get excited or switch off now. Thinking, "Oh, I don't want to listen to their stuff." We've got a question around um, taking on like a leadership role, like in an academy system, where maybe something like a head of youth, something like that. So, what does that look like, particularly the first not 3 months or so, which I know is right up your street and the people you support and what you've done previously as well. We've got a question around how you might manage tactical deficiency within your team, which I think is brilliant as well, and it got me thinking about, okay, how does that look? And then we've got a great question around, coaching and educating. And I guess really the question is it right for everybody, and we can debate that a little bit. So, is that a good summary of where we're at with today's episode?
Yeah, it's a good summary, and the difficult questions as well, Scott. You know what I mean? When I kind of heard them come through, I was like, "Oh God, give us some low hanging fruit that we." But they are really testing questions, and there will be stuff that we'll walk away from the episode, go, "Oh, I forgot about that," and people will email you, I know, and comment on the pod and stuff like that to add their weight to it,
Yeah.
which is a sign of a good topic as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, yeah, you're dead right. I mean, I'm pretty sure that at least one of these is way out of my my comfort zone. But that's why you're here, so no pressure, right? But okay, well, what we'll do is then we'll get into it. We'll try and we'll work through it. We won't dwell on too much. We'll have a good conversation around it. I'm also quite confident that the starter question, if you like, will lead us into other questions as well, and we can debate around that, which would be great for people to listen to. I will play the questions, and then we can chat about them. So I think the first one is from Laurie, and that's the one around the whole kind of head of youth and kind of the first 90 days. But let me play it, and then we can talk about it. Hopefully, everyone can hear this.
Hi Ray, how you doing? Hope you're well. I just got a quick question regarding a kind of a senior role. There's kind of obviously a lot of grassroots academies right now that have kind of head of youths, but might have maybe 10 teams or 20 teams, maybe starting off. But my question is really just, what does the first 90 days usually look like when you're into these clubs? What's the things you want to achieve? How do you kind of build that trust? And also, how do you develop that understanding between head coach, the head of the academy, and the multidisciplinary team? That'd be really interesting to hear about. Cheers.
Great question from Laurie. Great question. So obviously, Ray, I think this is something where I will need a lot of help answering that because I pretty much have no idea about this. So I'm intrigued to find out what your thoughts and views are. But I guess my first question to you would be, before we get into Laurie's actual question, is why has he specifically said about 90 days? I'm sure that's not an exact number, but just why not like just what should you do when you start? Why is maybe that kind of first 3 months particularly key? Do you think?
I think it maybe it comes from business, or it comes from the first 100 days of the U.S. presidency and all that. That's kind of a crescendo of it, and maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe after that time you are embedded. Now you're not the you're not the new guy or the new girl anymore. And it's a question. You know what? I've done it a few times, and I've got it. I would say I've done it well at times, and certainly one time I did it horrifically. And that's just been absolutely
Let's
honest
talk
with you.
about that time.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? And I'll probably refer to it as we go along, but still trying to sort of pull the learning outcomes from that, if you know what I mean. We talk about that in coaching all the time, don't we? When things go wrong, can you pick out why they went wrong?
Yeah.
And kind of never, or try not to do them, or be I don't know, kind of work not to do those sort of things again. So yeah, I think those first, and we could equate this to any first 90 days anywhere, or 100 days anywhere, whether that's in a new job, especially in leadership roles where you're in a new job, um, or even if you start a new football team or something like that, when everything is new and you're new, I think eyes are on you a little bit. You know what I mean? And what is he or she going to do when they come into this role? And if you flip it a little bit and you become one of the, in this case, one of the coaches, let's say at the club, you're looking at that going, well, what's that guy? Because Laurie is asking the question, what's that guy going to do for me? How is, is this going to upset me? Is it going to light a fire under me? So you probably have, if he quotes like a club, for example, of 20 teams, for example, that's a lot of people a little bit fretty about what happens next, and
Yeah.
is this guy going to let me crack on with everything? Is he going to bring a real broad piece of knowledge in and align the whole club or whatever it might be? And there's loads of contextual stuff to this. It could be the best run club in the world, and you just have to sort of pick up all the good practice and add a little bit of value here and there. Or it could be, really underperforming or something like that, and it needs, kind of major surgery and whatnot. So, and then you've got everything in between. Um,
Well, Ray, can I just jump in and ask you a question? Because again, I'm going to guess before we go into maybe what you might do in those 90 days, how important is it then in those senior roles? Um, to what you do before you join a club, and the kind of things that you might want to be asking and thinking about before those 90 days start. So how can you prepare yourself to make sure that actually some of the problems you may face or not face, you eliminate those or reduce them, or maybe you could just position yourself better for them. So is that a better starting point for us to look at, okay, what do we do first before we even join? And then, we get into what those 90 days might look like.
Yeah, I think people are quite used to that now as well, aren't they? Because there's a lot of information out there. Even your local football club will have whatever it might be, their Facebook posts or their websites and all that, the YouTube videos and things like that, and vice versa. Probably if you go into that role, you're Googleable as well, if that makes
Yeah.
sense, and people could look at your social media and your football social media and kind of figure out what it is you might do in that situation. So but it's still a lot of, I don't want to call it shadow boxing necessarily, but there's a lot of kind of trying to, what's going to happen next. I think if we speak about this as a job, I think anyone that was going into a new job that was asked to affect things, you've probably had at least one conversation with whatever, a CEO, a boss, a chairman, a leader in a football club that will probably give you the heads up on certain things. They might not always be comprehensive and they might not always be right. They might make bad things sound better and they might sound, all that sort of stuff. So it's still really important to go in with, I believe, with eyes wide open. Um, and really from you in that position when you start, I think you want to inspire people. I think you want to give people some sort of confidence that you're in there to help, to collaborate. That's the big mistake I made at a previous time, because I did exactly what you did and I looked at it from the outside and I had one or two smaller conversations with people that are probably a little bit removed from what's actually going on the ground, and you go in with all the best intention. I'm going to change this and we're going to do it this way, and no, out with that and in with this because that's just the right thing to do. um, and I would say I probably did in a month what I probably should have done in six, that sort of way in terms of changing things. And what you end up doing is you end up rubbing people up the wrong way, and things are changing too quick. And I feel now that you have to bring people that are there along for the journey with you, and kind of focus, I would say, foremost early on is that sort of collaboration with people, and um, it may be a give, maybe a quick win, if that makes sense, with the people that are there. And quick wins in football clubs can be, let me see if I can shoehorn a few £100 for new training kits for everyone. You know what I mean? Something like
Yeah.
that. And it might sound like a bit of a bribe or whatever, but just something you can latch on to early that says, look, I'm gonna move this the right direction. I'm going to be in your camp about it. Then, over time, once you've built that alignment with people and people know that, okay, that's the direction we're going to go. Um, he's a good guy. He wants what's best for us. We're not going to obliterate everything. Um, and then look, then put in whatever processes you want to do. You want to put in a playing style or a coaching curriculum or an IDP process or a new match day process or whatever it is. Most clubs, I think most clubs are still, every team goes to a different part of the training pitch and probably on a different night, and they're just completely disconnected and things like that. So maybe people are used to being kind of doing it alone.
Yeah.
And I know these roles are brought in usually to align those teams and get some common ground in between them, rather than just a badge and a shirt color.
In Laura's question, he asked specifically about, how you build trust in 90 days. And, um, I guess I don't know how easy it is to build trust, but it's quite easy to destroy trust quite quickly, isn't it? You can definitely shoot yourself in the foot pretty quick. And if you're in a good culture, when I say good culture, I mean probably a culture that aligns with, your own views and values. So that if we make the assumption in this scenario, there's a new person joined, the club they've joined, the culture seems like a good alignment, and they did the right prep work, and they got to the right people, and they got honest responses about stuff, so they're well aligned, whatever that culture may be. You'd hope then that you probably got a window of trust, haven't you? You got a honeymoon period, so you have to lose it as much as gain it. But what would you, in your mentoring role and your own experience as well, but in your mentoring role, if you were talking to somebody and saying to them, okay, what practical things might they be able to do in that time to try and establish trust? What kind of things would you encourage them to do? So I guess to not lose trust, but also to try and build on it as well.
Yeah, I think those people skills are really important. And how do you build trust with anyone? You speak to them, right, and you be honest with them, and you value what their opinion is. We talk about culture and we kind of throw the word away a little bit, but if you as a single person walk into an organization of dozens of people that's already formed, you're whether the culture is good or not, you're walking into something. So I think it's really important that if there's a gap, let's say, between the culture that is there now and what you want it to be, um, it's probably embedded for a reason, and you've got to get around that, and you've got to assimilate to that in its
But that
best
takes time,
form.
right, doesn't it? I reckon. If it's a cultural thing, I mean, you can't be trying. I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong here, but like, I wouldn't want to go into. So I love the job and I really want to do it, but I kind of felt, oh, the culture may not be me. But actually, we can work on that over time. Um, you can't do that on day one, though, can you? Or certainly, maybe not. Maybe you have to fix other things first, projects rather than the first 90 days.
And like, this never stops. I don't think you get to 90 or 100 days and you're plain sailing, especially in a football club. And when I've gone into football clubs, even if you go in at the start of the season, and you want to implement A, B, or C, you kind of feel like you're in a rush to do everything because, well, if we're gonna have this club wide playing style, for example, we've got to get it in before the first game of preseason. So here you go,
Yeah.
everyone. This is what we're doing from now on, and suddenly yeah, that kind of stuff can fracture relationships with people. Um, if we were to equate it to a workplace, and teachers used to always say something like this to me. So you're never, I can't remember the exact quote, but if you arrived into a secondary school, it will take you 6 years before you're there longer than all the kids. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
someone's always there longer than you, and someone
Yeah.
always knows the place a little bit better than you, and knows those sets of relationships a little bit better than you again. Um, so that's quite an interesting angle. So I think the most important thing you could probably do is assimilate first, show people that the things you're doing and the things that you want to implement over time are the right things. And if it's a little bit overwhelming for those people, um, then yeah, you take people by the hand and you go, look, this isn't as bad as you think, and this is what it might look like, and you start to get to work. Um, it's not easy, and I agree what you say about burning bridges before you can build that trust. So it's really important not to go in quite scattergun. Um,
Yeah.
Probably
And I guess I think you've alluded to it in what you said, but asking questions, listening, like, isn't that like maybe that's your first month there, isn't it? Just to ask all the questions, listen, don't have the ego, don't go in there, I know it all bit. Sometimes the badge or the job title can put you up on a pedestal. And I think maybe that's something that has changed a lot, both in football but also in industry, hasn't it? I don't think job titles mean as much now. People got away from that nonsense a little bit, and actually, you know what? I might have a senior role, but I might know a lot less than you. In fact, I probably should know less than you about certain things because that's your job and you're specialist at that. So I need to find out things. So is that a way in which you can build rapport and trust and kind of get people on your side?
Totally. I look, that's collaboration is, if there was any word to describe this whole thing, it would be about to seek that. And um, people, I think people like being asked what they do and how they do it and why they do it. You know what I mean? Not in an investigative sort of way, but in a kind of information gather. I think people like that idea. They want to feel valued. They want to feel heard. I think people want to, especially in football, I think people want to feel like if you've got this bigger project in mind, because that's probably why you've been brought in, because of some sort of bigger idea, that I know I would. I'd love to collaborate with that. I'd love to have my voice heard and help shape that a little bit. And you might find probably after those 90 days, you'll probably find whatever it is you want to do on day one would look a lot different. You know what I mean? And it'll probably
Yeah.
save you just being patient and sitting on your hands and talking and learning and observing and just getting a feel for relationships and um, for example, the last thing you want to be doing is talking about alignment between the under 14s and the under 15s when you actually find out that, I don't know, one of the under 14s actually plays for the under 15s and the coaches hate each other's guts. And do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You know what football can be like.
Yeah. So
Um,
you could have a draft plan, couldn't you? I guess essentially you could have a draft idea about what you might want to do, but maybe the trick there is keeping it draft and keeping it open mind, and then trying to ask the right questions, and then revisit that plan and see if you can find something that is well aligned to what you're trying to achieve.
there's something comes up that's far more important than it, and it's hard to really hypotheticalize it, but you know what I mean. It could be coach development. You know what I mean? There
Yeah.
could be a really strong need in that club for coach development or desire for it, or there might be none at all. There might be a just let us get on with it kind of stuff. And I think it's important that by the time you're making big decisions, that they're rounded ones, and you've been through the crowd, so to speak, to get to that
Yeah.
answer.
Well, and then so my final point on this question would be, what about the why? Again, I think something that's moved in industry a little bit better. I don't still think it's enough there. Is like change happens, but people don't always explain why the change is happening. It's like we're doing this, and not like because they have to justify it, but all just in the sense of bringing everyone together and stuff. How important, if you're going to go in, as a new person in the early stages of your role there, how important is if you want to make changes to kind of explain the rationale behind those? Do you think?
Start with why. I don't know if anyone's ever picked up that book, the Simon Sinek book. It calls Start with Why, and you're absolutely right. It's and we are all the same. We, especially, I think, call them modern people, but the younger generation, certainly the younger you get, they don't take things at face value anymore. Do you know what I mean? They want to be, and I think I certainly do as well. You want to know the why behind actions and change and things like that when they're taking place. And if your why is solid, and I think the good thing we have in football is if the why relates to the players, in case of, right, I want to, let's see, I want to explore a way of creating an extra training night or something like that, or a home video support homework type thing for all the players or something like that. And if you wanted to implement something like that, having the why as being, well, the players will be better, the club will be better, the coaches will be better in terms of A, B, C, and D. I think people always appreciate that, and it's a helpful thing to fall back on.
Yeah.
And at least any pushback then can generate a conversation rather than just I'm in one camp, you're in another camp, and we'll just see who can shout the loudest.
I guess in all roles, when you go into a new job, there's a tendency to feel under pressure to kind of perform and have a quick impact. Is that maybe one of the things where you can make a mistake in any role, but particularly again in football, where you've got to you've got to, but you want to have some successes quickly. Do you think that pressure sometimes creates a rush and trying to do things too quickly, because that, I mean, football's got that reputation about just being 100 miles an hour anyway, which it is. But you think it just amplifies that problem up, and that's something to try and be aware of if you go into that role. Just be a bit careful not to try and do things too quickly, and don't feel that pressure as much.
I was saying earlier that was arguably my biggest mistake in that particular role, that things, you can't move things on quick enough. Whether that's just because, and it, that was very, at the time, that was very me, if that makes sense. So it wasn't about, it was about me stood in the middle of the training ground watching all the sessions taking place, going, I'm not happy with this, and I don't want to wait around the whole time to sort it out a little bit. So I do think there's an element of patience, because look, if you've got a 1 year contract and you've been tasked to come in and do something really specific, then you probably have to roll your sleeves up quite quickly, and then those 90 days become a shorter period of time. You just have as many conversations as you can. If you're going into that role over the longer term, which youth development roles should be more, I would say as well, to a bit of a wider point. Yeah, maybe there's not so much of a rush to do it. Best practice, excellent practice, all that sort of stuff. It will take time to drip feed to everyone, and you'll have your allies, and then you'll have the ones that won't be so keen and things like that. But yeah, to be able to convince, and yeah, all those things we spoke about, trust, alignment. I think you do yourself a huge favor if you can get those things in the bag early.
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. All right. Thanks, Ray. Well, thanks, Roy, for the question. I think in summary, it was kind of like listen, ask questions, explain the why, don't feel the pressure, try and build the trust, understand the culture, do the prep work first, and, as much as you can. And also, you'd hope that whoever your, seniors are, that they recognize the fact that actually the worst thing you can do is try and rush and do things too quickly. So hopefully that you get that breathing space to be able to agree, what time frames you're working to. But I guess if anything, it's ask the right questions and listen, isn't it? First before you act. And yeah, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Ray. Okay, we're going to get on to in typical Zane style, he has asked a question that is very challenging. So again, this is going to be leaning on you a bit more here, I think, than my limited wisdom, Ray. But I'll play the question, mate, and then we can have a chat through it. So this is a question from Zane.
Ray, so my question is that when you're faced with the tactical deficiency of one of your teams, specifically in matches, do you tend to reverse engineer it? So do you look at the tactic and then try to work your way down to the individual errors that you see technically? Or do you start from the bottom up as looking at the individuals, what errors have been happening in the phase of play that you're looking at, or the scenario? And regardless of which one, or maybe some other one that I'm missing, how do you then not compromise the individual's development? Mostly at youth, but I guess it could be at any age level. But how do you not compromise the individual development as opposed to just trying to fix the tactic, looking for the win? And I understand that's all nuanced and contextual based to the relative level of competition, the age groups, etc. Thanks.
Okay, well, yeah, there you go. Zane testing us as he always always will. So look, let's rule out under sevens, eights, nines football for this, for me. That's okay, because really, if you're talking about technical and tactical stuff, let's position it accordingly. So I'm gonna, just for a benchmark, if we set around under 16s, we can go higher. So we're not like literally in the the win at all costs, your job's on the line phase, but just in that kind of middle space where it's competitive, it's serious enough. The players want to win their games. There's enough at stake, but it's not the be all and end all. And as coaches in clubs, we're probably still juggling that development, and we always developing players, but it's not a win at all cost culture. What's your take on the question first, and then we'll get into detail around it, because I got a little bit confused around it, to be honest with you, but maybe you can make it clearer for me.
Look, it's probably what I like about the question is probably the slightly unintended learning outcome for some people maybe listening in, and that's the kind of the correlation between technical and tactical. Right. So And when I first heard Zane's question, it reminded me of two things. And I'm pretty sure I wrote about both of them in one of my books. I can't remember which one. The first one was like the story of a rugby coach, and I think it's easier to understand it in this context a little bit. But a rugby coach with a bunch of young players that was trying a specific, we would call it a pattern. So the idea was whatever the pass would go short, short, and then there'd be a long pass and someone would miss out and it'd be an overlap run or whatever it was. And this quite something I suppose you would expect to see from a proper full rugby team, but it kept breaking down with the pass. So basically, the tactic was being undermined by the technical level of the players. So basically, the players couldn't throw the ball properly yet. So the tactic sort of goes out the window. For me, there's always this, I don't know if continuum is the right word, but this kind of line between the individual technical development and ability of players alone, for example, right up to the 11v11 game where we've all got a game plan or a strategy or whatever, way of attacking, way of defending, those kind of big tactical problems. So I think the question, if I change the wording of the question a little bit and remind me about the long-term development angle of the question as well. Well, the question is basically, if you see something going wrong on game day, do you address the tactical part, so the group part, or do you zoom in on the technical level of the player? That was my kind of reframing of the question, just to kind of help myself out with it. He's right as well in the question. There's loads of different nuance and context, and it's hard to be really specific here. In my point of view, if you're in 11v11 football and you're trying to cure something now on the pitch, that will be a tactical cure, because you're not going to improve a player's technical ability in the moment. Now, you might have someone say, well, you could speak to them and improve their confidence or their concentration, which would in turn, or the decision making, which would in turn improve their technical ability in the moment. That there's probably an argument for that. But I think if we're talking about instant wins, you've got a tactical deficiency in a particular game and you need to rectify that in game, then I do think it's that those are the tactical ones we're sorting. So positioning, shape, formation. I mean, you tell me whatever it might be, roles, responsibilities, things like that. You couldn't possibly have a team talk where you say, well, you've all got to be technically better in the second half. Well, you probably can hear that, but it doesn't
That's
mean
most of my team talks at half time. Just do better. But actually, that's a good point, because again, maybe a layer above Zane's question, not deeper into it, but above it is maybe that's the first issue here, and I'm talking from my own experiences. Having the ability during the game to be able to recognise what is a tactical issue and what is a technical issue, and the difference between two. Because I'm pretty sure I've got that wrong on many occasions, and with the great, I know I've watched a lot of coaches, especially when we're first starting out, in our coaching journeys. We're often seeing the same problem, because it's obvious what the problem is, but the actual solution, I think we can misread it when you're a less experienced coach. Is that layer one, do you think? And then once we know what the actual thing is, then it's right. Is it a technical thing? Is it tactical? And actually, then is it a tactical thing that we can fix quite easily? Is it a technical thing we can fix quite easily? Because maybe it is, like you say, just actually think about doing this, or actually working out that actually that technical problem is too big to solve right now. So we can't solve that. Let's focus on something else we can solve. And that's part of the match day thing. So sorry, I've jumped around a little bit, but I guess the first question is: do we blur that sometimes, you think, Ray?
Because we separate technical and tactical, and we do it as coaches, we do it for our own understanding of how often have you heard people say, the FA talk about four corners, and people say, well, players aren't corners, they're a mismatch of all of those things put together. And if you want to be a good finisher, technically a good finisher, you have to be a confident player, for example, or it helps if you are, or if you want to be a really good goalkeeper technically, then you will need agility and all that. So there's a bleed and blend of all these things. And the technical tactical bleed and blend, like they don't exist without each other. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing. So separating them is not as easy as it sounds, I guess. But we do it because we need to box off these somehow. Um, Certainly in game, um, if you were looking at a player who's technically not able to do something, and that was the flaw in whatever was going on, then you have a problem in a sense because they're either, for example, they're either playing in the wrong position or you're giving them a role and responsibility that they're not yet able to carry out. And that's the kind of stuff you take back to the training ground to over time you would want to be making players technically better as you go through the system. That's why most people I feel would land on, well, let's sort this out tactically to the best level we can. So do I put that play? Do I change positions with that player, for example? That would be a tactical solution. The second story I was going to maybe just help bring it to life a little bit. The second story that it reminded me of was from Chris Ramsey. I think Chris is at the FA now. The last time I spoke to him, he was at Queen's Park Rangers, and he's really quite a dynamic youth developer. Is Chris? He used to be at Tottenham as well. And he tells a wonderful story about the struggling fullback. I don't know if you've ever heard it.
I don't think so.
So the fullback is struggling under 18. Fullback is struggling on match day. So it's a Premier League under 18 game, struggling 1 versus 1 with a really good winger, right? So to solve that problem, what do coaches do? So if that situation, we have a few things we could do. We could be really harsh and take him off, right? We could change positions. We could get the winger to double up. We could get the defensive midfielder to double up. We could get the I don't know, wide centre back to cover better or something like that. So what we end up doing is we give that player loads of support, or we change the situation so that it's not as deficient, as to use Zane's word, as it could be. What Chris says is leave it because it's youth football, it's development, and this is the best training session he'll have because he is getting a real tough test from an opponent. And that's a kind of, for me, that's a bit of an aha moment, isn't it? You know what I mean? Where you go, okay, we're going to let this happen in a kind of a safe and structured way. So that there'll come a point where, you don't let it get to the point where, the kid's on the floor and, is absolutely decimated by what's gone on. You reach
You
a point.
stretch and challenge rather than drown and sink. Yeah.
Exactly. So that stretch part, that can't be stretched too far. But I thought it was a wonderful reminder of what are we correcting and why. So if a player is struggling, if we're struggling down the right hand side, and our solution is to change the right hand side, that's okay. I think if you're in the Premier League trying to win on a Saturday, but in youth football, it does go deeper than that, and that struggle is okay sometimes. And what maybe we're not so good at then is going, we're really good at going, oh, we had problems defensively today, so Tuesday night we're going to coach defending. Well, what we don't do is we don't stretch out those real the evidence we get from matches. We don't stretch it out long enough. Like we don't say, well, what's actually been happening to us over the last month? That's the problem, not just a game. And how do we stretch that? If our players are not technically at the level that the league or whatever requires, and it's showing up time and time again, like what's the training ground solution? I'm not talking about a move league solution, but do we look back and go, well, and look forward and go, how do we make players technically better over time? And stuff like that. But look, it's a really interesting question. I don't think we land on one exact answer. I think if you're going to try solve a tactical problem now, like on the side of the pitch, then it will be a tactical solution. If you have a really long-term hat on, you call on that Chris Ramsey idea and you go, well, actually, I'm going to let this play out because it's important that it does. And then if you constantly find technical problems, then your solution is definitely a long-term one.
Yeah. So I would say then to answer this question, like the first thing is it a because he did say a tactical deficiency, or actually, is it a tactical deficiency? First question, is it a tactical thing or is it a technical thing? If it's a technical thing, from the coach on the side, can I give some advice and guidance now that could help that player out? Because actually, it might be something that's actually quite simple. It might just be if you scan a bit further, or you just receive a bit further. It's something simple that can make a difference. Just try at least it before we make any tactical changes. Or is it actually this is something we need to work on over a period of time because nothing changes in a session or a match really significantly. Having that, and again, this is where coaching is a craft, isn't it? And you need that experience, and you haven't necessarily be a great coach, but just recognizing the problem first. Even if you haven't got the solution to it necessarily, but recognizing what the actual problem is, rather than trying to throw a solution at something that maybe not be the right solution for that problem. But so is it a technical thing? Can we do something to help it now? Or or do we want to use this game as an opportunity to develop that? Again, that requires probably a bit of foresight, or maybe not necessarily, but certainly the player buying into that as well, right? And understanding what we're doing, and the team, what we're doing here, in a constructive way. But then if all those things are no's, then okay, what can we do as a coach tactically then to help our players to still get the game objective achieved? Now that may be getting 3 points, it may be, whatever it might be, but how do we do that? In the hope that actually just subbing the player off just because, we might be struggling because that should probably be the last. You hate saying in the Premier League, let alone seeing that with your under 16s and we see it. We can see under sevens on a pitch on a Sunday. You can see the kid getting taken off because he's struggling. And I guess the other side to that is just the bit that we're ignoring here. You touched on, to be fair. It's the bit about the other variables that come into play, right? The opposition, the conditions, the weather. You might take him off, and they might take their player off because they're time for a change. So you've got to be able to see all the variables as well, right, and roll with it. So there's a lots of nuance in there, isn't there, Ray? I guess is the thing.
The best thing I've really pinned down in my own head over the last couple of years is the idea of how complex the game of football is, and if you kind of make peace with that, and accept that you won't have all the answers for all the questions in that moment, it's really, really liberating. Um, just while you were talking there, I was thinking about a fullback I had when I was abroad, and the relationship between one fullback and the other on the same team. And you can do a couple of those things you spoke about. You can address things quite quickly and then bed it into long-term learning. So I'll give you the example. So when I first arrived, when the left back went forward, the right back stayed home. Right, that sounds really old school, but that was his habit at the time. And when he stayed back, it normally ended up a 3 versus 1 situation, so a +2 at the back. So what I asked him to do in the moment, without explaining the why, actually was, instead of staying home and joining the back line, join the midfield line. So you're resting, or your active rest, so 20 yards higher up the pitch, and just become a sort of another midfield body. And then was able to take him back. And not everyone will have video, but take him to one side and go, well, actually, we don't need you there as a +2. If you go in there, then maybe you can pick up the second ball and all that sort of stuff. And he never did it again. Do you know what I mean? It was that kind of point in time where you saw something, you addressed it, and you kind of, I guess, Zane used the reverse engineer idea that you kind of work backwards from that. But yeah, all these moments are so specific, and they're so specific to players that, it's what makes it really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess the other thing here is I'm thinking in my own coaching, like stick to your principles, right? As in your coaching principles. So, if there's an issue on the pitch, whether it might be, but what you're trying to do, what your principles of play here. So, so just don't. If it's to whatever it might be, it's hard because we've got our own ones. But if it's to control the game out of possession, or control press recovery we have now, is it the control that's not right? Is it the press that's not right? Is recover? What's not quite right? And what's the best way of fixing it? But don't get too complicated. Just and obviously these should be things you worked on in training anyway. So for the players, sometimes just a refreshing, just a reminder about, okay, what do we try and do? It's not too complicated here. Just we're trying to do a couple of things and just reminding them, okay, why isn't it working? Okay, maybe they've got an overloaded midfield or something else. Okay, what do we do about that then? And then talking through it, but don't just throw away your principles, in your game model, however basic that probably it could and should be, I think, in my view. Don't too complicate it, but don't just throw it away because something's not quite right, and get too bogged down in something too specific. Just keep it broad and just right. How do we work on this? And actually, we've got a great challenge there. They're a really good attacking team. You know, we play X at the back, and therefore we've got to do that. So yeah, that's our challenge. Brilliant. What a great learning opportunity. How do we what things can we do in relation to our principles of play today that let labels to get better at that? So it hasn't got to necessarily be right. Panic, you should be able to lean on these things there as almost like a safety blanket.
Yeah, definitely. I think we spoke about this before, didn't we? The idea that you're, nothing should be necessarily new on match day.
Yeah,
But then,
absolutely.
but then sometimes that I'm sure it was us who had this conversation, Scott. It might have even been off mic where yeah, you can say that, but then the opposition rock up with a midfield diamond, and you don't know what's going on, and you have to sort of stop the bleeding, and
Yeah.
that does become a long term point, even though you weren't expecting it to.
But I think in that situation, you're spot on. But I think if you've got good principles, they stay the same. You adapt them for that challenge, don't you? So you suddenly like you if your principles are like we will only play ball on the floor 10-yard passes, well, you're probably going to limit yourself to different scenarios where you may struggle. But if your principle of play is right, how do we create the best attacking opportunities? Based on what's in front of us. Then it's like okay, well, what have we got now? How are we going to do that? How do we adjust it? If you've got a team where you can dominate your principles regardless of what they bring to the table, then fantastic. Fair play to you. But most of us don't have those kind of teams, so we've got to roll with the punch sometimes, haven't we, and be flexible.
No one, Scott. No one has those teams. No one has. Like you could, we spoke in the first question about basically selling ideas to other people, and if you sat down with a group of players and you said this is how we're going to play and these are our principles and this is what we're going to do, they will always be able to say, well, what if that happens? And you go, well, we're just going to have to, whatever it might be. It's
Yeah,
we can't legislate for all those things. I want to cross the ball in high and early, and someone says, well, actually, that's really inefficient. You go, well, if we do it often enough, we'll get success, and blah 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 blah. You over and back. That's why we do it. That's why you never come to a tactical finish. Do you know what I mean? You can
yeah,
have Guardiola dominate for years, and by the time he leaves the Premier League, he's playing counter-attack football with a Donnarumma rather than a Bravo. And do you know what I mean? The game
yeah,
moves on
absolutely.
because we find solutions to it. So if we could stop looking for the silver bullet one, it's really helpful and just, be um, what the team or the principles you have and warts and all and going, okay, we'll find solutions within those principles to the problems they cause. And
Yeah. Perfect, brilliant. All right, thanks, Ray. Well, look, Zane, thank you for that great question. Again, gets us thinking. I love the fact that actually we're showing a lot on trying to recognise the difference between tactical and technical, and then how you go about it. I think that is something that I certainly don't get right, during games, and just thinking first before I try and say something about what actually is the issue here. So brilliant. All right, fantastic. Okay, our final question for this, okay, comes from Damien, and I love this question. I think it's brilliant. So let's play, and then we'll talk through it for our last question of this episode.
Hi guys. Hi Ray. So, just to give you some context, here in France, we don't really say coach for young kids. We use the word educator. But the thing is, because our grassroots football relies so much on volunteers, we often end up putting the wrong people in these crucial roles. To be honest, I see a lot of adults who just lack the empathy, the training, or even the right attitude to create a safe, encouraging environment where kids can actually thrive. So it makes me wonder, are we all cut out to be educators? Like, how do we actually define a great grassroots educator? And more importantly, how do we fix this gap when clubs just desperately need volunteers to fill the spots? Thanks.
I think that's a fantastic question from Damien. Like literally, and I'm pleasantly surprised to hear it's come from France. Like because it shows maybe these things, aren't just in your local area that you think is just a regional issue from where we are, or just a England issue or something else. So yeah, it's a constructive question because look, grassroots football is built on volunteers, and millions of people give it their time every weekend. and I believe the vast majority that are doing it for the best interest. They believe, I don't think many people get into it just to be mean and nasty and to ruin people's lives or journeys. I think they do it for best intentions. However, I'm going to put it out there now. Like, yeah, I have seen and see regularly people that, through no support of their own, but probably need a lot more help and guidance in what they're doing around young people. And do have a negative impact on that on those kids' journeys. And Damien's question is a great one in the sense of should we just be accepting anyone to do the job because they're there to do it as a volunteer, or do we need to kind of have a benchmark in there? And if so, what does good look like? And what I think is the 133rd episode of this podcast, and I don't think we've ever done a session about we may have touched on it a little bit, but really, what does a great coach look like? Like really, when what those things, not a great coaching session, not the stuff, but actually what things you need to be a real great coach. We may have done it earlier on, but I think it's not spoken about enough, and in a real way, not in the nice fluffy stuff, but in a real warts and all kind of way. But Ray, what's your thoughts on the questions first, and we'll get into the detail. Do
I
you
love the
see it as
fact.
a big question? I mean, because obviously I'm buried in grassroots football. Do you like you're slightly away from that space. Do you still see this as a question and its importance, or is it different because of where you're at?
Yeah, I do, but it doesn't mean it doesn't mean I have the answer for it either, because the football is built, and I'm not talking about grassroots football. I'm talking about the whole of football is built on the volunteer coach that starts, the member of the community, the teacher, the parent, whatever it might be, that puts their hand up in this time of year and goes, yes, I'll facilitate these 10 kids playing football because otherwise they won't be able to do it. Right? That's I'm sure many people listening, that would have been the start of the journey, or they have their own child involved that they want to make sure that they're playing football. I think that's sort of ground zero in all of this system, right? And if you think of every player we've watched at the World Cup has come through a grassroots process of some point where they've played with their like I say, their community member, their teacher, whatever it might be that's running the team. So we can't, as a sport that's the most popular sport in the world, we're going to have a pretty extreme workforce if that's your entry point into it, right? Because that's just, we can, once they're in the system, then you talk about support and education and all that. But there's a lot of support and education out there, I would say, in lots
Yeah.
of different ways. Then there's football's inability sometimes to accept support, because the very, I think we said this on the last episode, the very second you become a football coach, you're seen as you're supposed to have the knowledge and the solutions to all of these problems. There's very few coaches you see that will rock up and go, I just want these kids to play. Everyone then starts to rock up as if they've got all the answers. So it's a really difficult balance. The I don't have it. I could tell you the solution is to make coach development better and make support for coaches better, but I still think we'd be talking about the same things. I think all those things are in place, but that's a big old, that's a big old percentage of coaching that takes place in those conditions. I do love the fact that they call them educators. I think that's quite nice. Um, you're shaking your head. What are you thinking? I'm about to
Oh
mute, I
no,
think.
that was well at our local grassroots club that I've been part of for a while. I hated the word coach. I hated seeing the word coach on the back of a shirt. I wouldn't have on my one like I wasn't a coach. I did a level one badge. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm not a coach. My background was in education, so I actually feel comfortable called an educator because got my degree. I did years work in education. I earned the right to kind of be at least call myself an educator. but I also think that potentially could be misplaced on the back of people's shirts as well. So once you, an educator or a coach, so we used to call them facilitators because I think that's as good as we were. We facilitated sessions, and that's all we asked our coaches to do. So forget, don't be a coach, be a facilitator. Just and there's still a lot of, when I say just, there's still a lot about rocking up, setting up the practice right. It's not an easy thing to do to facilitate, but I think when you get to a certain level of experience and maybe you put your hours into your coaching badges or whatever else, then maybe you can start being looked at as a coach potentially. I've done it for 12 years. I got my UA for B. I think I'm probably a coach at times, but I still facilitate a lot more than I coach because I'm not capable of coaching, not to the level I want to get to. I haven't got the eyes for it. I've been fortunate the last few months to spend some time with someone else who's a UEFA A licensed coach, been around the game a long time, played a bit, and I think I learnt more in 3 training sessions and matches with him than I learned probably in the last. It was certainly my whole UAFB course, with all respect to it. Because these guys just know what they're doing, and it puts you in perspective. So I think the name is wrong. I'll be honest. I think it gives a false. We're not coaches. I don't believe it's volunteer people. Most of us aren't coaches anyway. Should I say? Not everybody. And I remember hearing. I don't know if it was in your. It might have been your book, Ray. But I don't want to put it in your book if it wasn't in your book because it's quite a bold quite a blunt statement. But it might not have been you. But I remember reading something where it said, or maybe it was a quote from someone. It might have been one of your books. Said volunteering is not an excuse for poor performance. And I would stand by that 100%, especially when you're working with kids. Because you've got an obligation to do the best you can. Now you could still be rubbish, like that's okay. Don't get me wrong. I certainly spend a lot of time being rubbish and have good rubbish moments still now. But ultimately, there is a line between being rubbish and being poor. I think not being quite where you need to get, but actually being poor, where your contribution is detrimental to the journey that your players are on. I think 2 things I don't buy. Number one is, I don't think you would lose coaches by increasing the bar around what's required to be a volunteer coach. I don't think you would. I think you just use the wrong coaches. Other people would step into it. I think you'd get better people in. As long as the bar was set about and clear about what that bar was. We have to talk about that in a second or two. But also, secondly, I think, let's say you did, worst case, and I'm Scott's completely wrong, and you actually would lose as a coaches. Well, there's still loads of fields and goals and balls and jumpers. And kids would go back to doing what we did when we grew up. If they really wanted to play football, they would. You'd find a way to play, And actually, I've seen enough sessions and enough games where those kids were better off going 20 versus 20 over a field with 4 jumpers and a ball than what they're getting with 20 coaches, 20 adults around trying to manage a game. And I know I'm getting on my high horse a little bit here, and maybe I'm looking at the extreme examples here, but you've only got to look most weekends, in most games, in most leagues across England. Maybe most is a bit harsh, but in too many games, too many weekends across England, the environment that the players are in, driven by their volunteers and other adults around that situation, is completely unacceptable and inappropriate. And I can't think, if we're involved as adults and we're making that experience worse, why are we there? Well, what's our contribution? Let the kids do their own thing. Sorry, Ray, I've gone off on a rant. I knew I would go off on a rant
I
on
knew
this
you would
one,
as well.
but there you go.
I knew
Can't
you would
help
as
it.
well, and I feel like I'm now going to ask you questions to probe some of that sort of
Oh
thing.
yeah, go on.
No, but I find it really interesting. I think a lot of people listening will think, oh my goodness, Scott's, he talks about having his B license, but he talks, he'll barely call himself a coach. And I've just spent the last number of weeks doing a course with some coaches where we talk about implicit and explicit coaching. And I think what you were talking about there, and correct me if I'm wrong, was you want to be a better explicit coach. Like you want to be able to diagnose and solve problems easier or quicker, or whatever the case may be. And that's how the stereotype sees coaches, right? I think we produce coaches that live up to the stereotype of coaching, which is explicit, loud, bullying at times, quite cutthroat at times. I think that's how the world sees a football coach. right?
Well,
And I don't
well, I
know.
think you're right, and a lot of it is about opinions, isn't it? Coaching, like, opinions, and I think a lot of the coaching courses are about opinions. Certainly, the ones I've been on, they've been very much opinionated by the people directing it. You know, not all, but often. But I didn't want to undermine the B license here. Don't get me wrong. You learn things on that. Well, you know, I guess it depends what you get, but you get some things on it. But I guess my point is that doesn't equate to someone who's had 25 years doing their job. So, and they call themselves a coach. So I don't feel the right name is a, so we can't I can't call myself the same thing as this guy that's done it. And I'm standing next to this guy, you know, just for a few months. I realised no, like I'm okay, I'm all right, you know, and I've put the hours into, you know, I can put a team out and we can do things right, and I think we've got a good approach about stuff. But I'm not on this guy's level. I'm not on this guy. I've not worked in football full time for 25 years, so I shouldn't be. So to have the same name feels it's like having the same job title, but actually, you know, like I'm not going to call myself, you know, a head chef of a five-star restaurant if I'm, you know, working down my local cafe cooking. But there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. But I'm still learning my trade, so it just feels like, you know, you put yourself all in this one big bundle, and it doesn't feel right.
The going back to the educator part of it, it's quite an interesting angle because I wrote about it in Making the Ball Roll. You'll definitely remember that because of your background, where you talk about the like our we're teachers in a sense. It's teaching and learning that's going on, and I remember kind of as I did a bit of mental preparation for this podcast, I cast my mind back. I think I was about 8 in primary school, and to this day, if I want to north and south, I've got figured out, right? But if I want to know where's east and where's west, my teacher in primary school had east and west on the four side, north, south, east, and west on the four sides of the walls. So, and this might sound a little bit quirky or whatever, but I know as a 42, no, 43-year-old man, I don't even know my age, but I know where
But you know where West is.
yeah, I know where East and West are because of those little posters that were on my primary school wall, and they just kind of they just landed with me, and I call that stuff implicit. So the stuff where it's not massively, it probably is intentional from the teacher, but it's not. I am going to teach you where West is. You know, it's planted there for you to pick it up yourself and kind of absorb that in. And I think if we accepted that implicit part of coaching more, where we were just thought, I'm supporting a local grassroots coach here in a different way than kind of my mainstream work as a bit more of a friendly sort of thing. He's new on the journey and things like that. And we talk about implicit coaching, right? And he's got a tough group, and there's the young kids and all that sort of stuff, no different than anyone else around the country. So the things we've focused on straight away are not the things that are focused on in, for example, in a level one or an introduction to coaching. And um, also for the fact I'm not going to speak to him about child safety and all that does need to be looked after in a different sort of way. We're balls, bibs, and cones stuff. Do you think, though, Scott, if we made that introduction to coaching more difficult to attain and held to a higher standard? I remember someone working with a federation explicitly telling me this is a qualification in tying your shoelaces. That was a quote from the horse's mouth. And I think now it's gone online. It's a gimme qualification because they want people out there. They want people to go through it and deliver safe sessions that are good for kids that are, you know what I mean, don't do any damage. But it doesn't. Okay, back to my question. Do you think those courses, those entry level ones, should be of a higher value, a more challenging one?
I don't think that would be a bad thing, but I don't think it would make fix this problem. I don't
Mm,
think it would. Um, I think the solution to this issue would has to be from the awarding organisation, the governing body, has a defining benchmark about entry point into volunteering in youth football, in youth sports, generally speaking. You know, so these are the things that you are signing up to do and be. You know, so and I get then it needs to be enforced and it makes things awkward, but actually it's almost like, look, don't do this if you can't do this stuff. And I think some people will reflect first, right? Oh, hold on a minute, rather than me just being the last person to step back when I was asked. And that's not even the case. Like a lot of people want to do this stuff, they want to do it, they do. People say they don't, but they do. We've never had a team fold in our club. I don't think everyone stepped up and covered it at some point, so, and we got 500 players, boys, girls, and there's always someone who wants to do it. But sometimes the loudest person gets in the way of the right person, or the more pushy person. But I think what you should have is like, right, if I'm doing this, this is what the role looks like, and the basic things are universal across the whole of the sport. So I will be a role model. Now, what does that look like? So I will behave myself on such time that I use right language. All these things, like simple things, but put them there, spell them out, make them really clear, and we sign the contract and we say, you know what? We understand if we don't abide by these just 10 simple things, nothing, not about your knowledge of football, nothing to do with how, your session planning or your game model, nothing like that, just how any adult should act around young people. And I would put that as under 16s, maybe even under 8%, under 16s and down. If I'm going to do this job, these are the 10 things that I must make sure that I do not default on. I do not default. And if I do default on it, I'll probably not be able to do this job anymore because these are non-negotiables. The things I see happen on the football pitch, you would not get away with in a school.
Yeah. Yeah,
On
yeah,
it,
yeah.
you're not even close, not even close to it. And if you did it, not only would you lose your job, you'd probably end up being in bigger trouble than that. And I don't get why we have this acceptance. And look, again, we're focused on the worst scenarios here. There are still a lot of good things that happen out there, definitely, but they'll come anyway. These people won't do this stuff. So the good things, it doesn't affect the good people. They're going to keep doing the good stuff anyway. This is only going to hopefully filter out some of these people that probably need to either think twice or get some support before they go into that space, before they get the opportunity then to suddenly find themselves, they've done it for 3 years. And that becomes the norm now. That becomes the norm practice, and actually some of the things these people do are quite successful in winning games of football. So, it becomes like a bit of a weird thing because hold on a minute, and the parents don't know often what's the best practice, what's normal, because that's what they hear the same thing from the other club down the road, and that's where we're at now. And it's like I said, Damien's question is quite refreshing. That actually maybe it's not just an England thing here, but nonetheless, the kids will pay the price for this because their journey could be so much better, not easier, no, not more successful in regards to trophies, but certainly better from a whole round experience.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of to and fro and we could do here because I do think there'll be some people in some clubs listening that need that last person to stand up, and more often than not, for teams not to fall, because I think plenty do. Um, yeah, it's horse to water. I think with some coaches as well, coach facilitators, whatever you want to call them. This, you can't make them drink, and that's the problem. And you can sweeten the water or whatever it
Can you
is, and
scare them away though, Ray? Can you scare them, or at least make them think first? Because I don't think these people are bad people. Like, I don't think, like I said, I don't think any of these guys, unless they're not bad people, and I don't think their intentions are bad. But I don't know that they know, necessarily the consequences of what they're doing, and it's become the norm, Ray. Like the way these people act, sometimes it's like that's just how it is. You're like, well, hold on a minute, like that doesn't make it right. Um,
not right. And look, everyone on this call could generate a story now of that coach in their neighborhood,
yeah.
or that they played against, or in their club that behaves like this. And like you say, the annoying thing is they win, so they get a certain amount of gravitas from that, and you must be doing it right. And I I I went to a weekend tournament quite recently, and bumped into a grassroots tournament, and bumped into quite a few coaches I know locally and things like that. And you look around and there's, I don't know, 1,000 kids playing or whatever it is. The sun is shining, there's pitches marked out, and you're thinking, God, this is fantastic. And I spoke to one coach that said, it's tournament season, isn't it? I said, you got more of these tournaments coming up. He said, yeah, I've got two or three more, whatever he said. This is our third one or whatever. And he said, I've got a big group, so I don't, I don't take everyone. So I like to give them a spread. And I thought, do you not like your home life and kind of thing? But the question was genuine. You step back and you go, that's unbelievable value that you're giving people, like unbelievable value. And you could probably translate that to the other dozens and dozens of coaches and facilitators that were there that day. You take your hat off to them. Every single one of them a volunteer. but then we always loop back on the horror ones, the horror shows.
Yeah, the bad, a few bad apples, right? They just kind of seem to spoil it. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it's not because the I was about to compare it to something a little bit more difficult. Uh, my wife has worked with people throughout her life, and she particularly worked with the elderly at points as well. And she would pull her hair out with things like I don't know if I should even go down this road, but she would talk about care homes that would have a high turnover of staff that were paid poorly and have a low barrier to entry because then you just got people who were just kind of filling jobs that weren't the right people for those jobs. And it reminded me a lot of this, whereby you want the right people in there. And when whatever people do arrive in there, you want them to be constantly trying to become better, I guess, or
Yeah.
trying to, because if you don't know, you don't know. And that the time you do put up your hand, whoever volunteers for whatever reason, by the time they do put up their hand, they don't know. They don't,
Let me
you
ask
know,
you a question, right? I think that's a great point. But do you think, and a general open question here, like not extreme bad, because that's an obvious answer, but are we better off having, you know, poor behavior from volunteers, but having a volunteer than having no volunteer? And I think that's the question, isn't it? To some extent, like, and I don't think it should be one or the other. But we're kind of saying, well, actually, gentlemen, we'll accept a bit of poor because we need them. That's what it feels like.
know who's accepting it because from what I've seen in the grassroots game, they come in, they get the team. Have you done your level one yet? You need to get your safeguard, and I've checked your online profile. You
Yeah.
still need your first aid, and by the time they cycle through all those kind of tick boxes, you're on your own.
Yeah.
You don't lose the footballs. Do you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
otherwise,
Yeah.
you're
And
on
then
your
there's
own.
another 10 coaches in your division, your league, all in the same situation. So you kind of learn from each other a little bit. You're not talking just by habits and seeing, observing, and suddenly that becomes that then sense that sets the level of expectation and acceptableness. And the leagues don't do nothing about it. The FA doesn't do nothing about it. They just okay, that's the level that's accepted. And it's not. I'm not criticizing those 10 coaches necessarily. It's not. Well, I'm criticizing them, but I'm not saying they're deliberately going out there to create, an environment that's below what I believe is acceptable at times. Um,
You
but
put a bunch of if you put a bunch of 16-year-olds in those positions,
mm,
solution would be, well, we need to go have a word with these 10, 16-year-olds because we're giving them the benefit of the doubt because of their age and they need to be shown the error of their ways, wouldn't we?
yeah,
But because it's adults, we kind of have a different view
yeah,
of it a little bit. And you're right, if you're all kind of manning a ship on your own, you pick up the behaviors of everyone else and you revert right back to that stereotype. If the team winning the league has the loudest, brashest, win at all costs coach on it, your parents are asking you, well, why aren't you that? You know what I
and then
mean?
what happens, right? Within 3 seasons, you have 5 teams doing the same thing. That's and it filters down, and then so that's how things manifest. But what I also it's not just about that. I think the other side to this coin is, and I'm not sure if Damien meant this in his question, but sometimes there's also coaches out there that, they're not loud and brash or win at all costs, but they can still have, ulterior motives. It may be they're in it for their own kids' journey only kind of thing, or their own personal, kudos or status or whatever else, and I think that, they're under the radar a little bit, but that they can almost have a detrimental effect in many ways on the group as well, because ultimately what I believe is, when you're in this privileged role is a very privileged role to be able to look after, 10, 15, 20 players and be part of their coaching or part of their football journey, whether it's one season or 20. It's a privilege to be able to do that. But you have to respect that, and you're there for them. They're not there for you. None of this is about being here for me or what I want to. It's like I want to enjoy the journey. Of course I do, but I want to enjoy them enjoying their journey. And I think if we can find people that have that, then then I think that's a starting point. And if we had this kind of this 10 point list, so it could be 20 points, but 10 point list, that was perfectly fair and reasonable. And there's nothing on it that would be, do not, role model would include do not swear on the pitch. Well, straight away, I can tell you now that that would put a lot of people that I know on a red flag because they don't conduct that one thing. Hold on a minute, you're talking, and I'm talking about 16-year-olds, talking about 7, 8, 9-year-olds, simple things like, well, hold on a minute, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with having just these things in there? But the problem is people won't want to enforce them, will they? That's the bit then, that's when it falls down because actually they shouldn't have to, but they won't want to enforce them.
We look, Scott, we used the word culture earlier on, didn't we? And culture
Yeah.
builds up over time and it becomes embedded, it becomes strong. So you could have a school team that are playing rugby that will play the game in a rugby like way where you're shaking hands with people and you're saying thank you ref and accepting decisions straight off. You take them onto a football pitch and it changes. And that my biggest worry is that we're too far gone in all this, and there's no clawing. It does, and there's no clawing it back because we can send the message to the coaches, but then we have, what messages do we need to get to parents about? Because the coach will soon be telling you, go, Ray, I'm being really quiet and I'm doing all the stuff I should be doing, and I'm saying, I'm rotating game time and all that sort of stuff, all those things in your 10-point checklist. All my parents are giving me grief because I'm not banging the drum and I'm not loud enough and I'm not harsh enough. I've had it before. You're not harsh enough on my.
Oh, right, right. That's a really good point. Sorry to jump in, but I know we're pressed for time. But I just want to say, to be clear on this 10-point plan, the things I wouldn't include are things like specific decisions around the club philosophy. So if you want to have a club where you don't rotate players and you want to kick the ball long and do all that stuff, that I think is a philosophical choice, and I think that should be absolutely fine. What you should be is transparent about that. So my 10-point plan would be one thing is you need to be really clear about your approach to your football things, including things like game time stuff like that. Because if I want to sign my player up, my son or my daughter up to a team, I get to choose which one I want to go to potentially if they happen to have me. So I'm not going to tell people how they should play their football because that's not right. But I am going to say, what you can't do is be swearing from the touchline. What you can't is be abusing the ref. You should be there on time. You can't make the sessions about your own child. The things in there like quite broad stuff that you think these are just reasonable stuff, but not around tactical stuff. I don't think. And if you want to shout from the touchline, you can shout touchline, but you can't shout abuse. You can't like if you want to shout instructions, that's absolutely fine. So they have to be really carefully written and a lot more thought than I'm giving it right now. But just to be clear, I wouldn't want to tell people what they should and shouldn't do with regards to how they coach in inverted commas their players, but just around behaviour really and expectations and what it is to be a volunteer youth, person in any world, I guess, in any sport.
It would be really interesting to see, Scott, if you could get a, I'm going to use the English terms here, a county FA and
Mm,
a bunch of leagues, and get a proper pilot of
yeah.
some of the things you suggested there and some of the things we spoke about, and actually look at it over a period of time and go, because of this, are we losing those volunteers? For example, is there evidence of teams folding and stuff like that? Can we, when the wrong ones are in there and we challenge them, do they then become the right ones, or do they leave? And can we then replace them? And just literally play it out. And
Do you know what I think we'd get, Ray? I think we'd get more. So I think what happens, you'd filter out some of the rahs and you'd end up getting some of the, oh, well, this is actually quite, and the whole thing becomes a lot more pleasant. Still competitive, and you still got your space, no one says you can't make mistakes, but just get off that raw bit first. And I think you'd open up doors to others. I honestly do. I think you'd get more. I think you get more and potentially more of the people that are in it for the right reasons.
listen, I think you might be right, but it would be really, really, really interesting to see if we did pilot it out somewhere, somehow, with league cooperation, with
Yeah.
the coaches themselves invested in the players, and all that you are part of this pilot thing to make it better. Because, like, how do we turn the ship otherwise? I think the environments are better. If we look back 20 years, I think the environments are better. I think you'll acknowledge that as well somehow. If not, squeaky clean all the time, I think they're
Well, I'm
better.
going to say they're not, honestly. I know, yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to- again, and maybe it's just me having bad experience, but like I would love to do a check to see how many. I want to set up something where people can post in good and bad their weekend match day experiences. I think coaching environments are much better than they've been before, 100%. I think coaching's come on loads, but the match day experience I think it's got worse for lots of reasons. I think it's the Premier League hasn't helped, so in the sense of it's more every parent thinks their kid's going to get there now. They have it all. Like it's got the money. People are paying £25 to play showcase games. A showcase game is basically one grassroots team against another grassroots team. It's crazy. Like it's just got so caught up in this stuff. And again, I'm not going to judge what people spend on games and the aspirations, it's fine. But I think we should all be judged on the conduct we have around kids. And you're talking about fights, punching, stabbings, threats, and it isn't. This isn't, a completely unique. Oh, it happens like once every 50 games. No, I think it happens quite a lot, and I think the root cause of this is the environment we've created because we've got lots of people involved that maybe aren't supported enough or don't know what they're saying just to when they first sign up.
I don't know if we've got to the end of Damien's question or not.
No, we
I think we
haven't.
have.
But
But
I
I
said
do
it's a bit of podcast in itself, didn't I? We should.
from next week, everyone. We are now calling it the soccer. I forgot it. The soccer facilitating podcast.
Yeah. Look, well, legit, like, before I regret everything I said there, look, that doesn't take away the thousands and thousands of people that do great work in this space, and not just the ones with the badges on their back on the Saturdays, but the ones that cut the grass, do the lines, put the goals up, organise the fixture lists, do the admin, do the insurance, all the league administrator, all that stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And without those, it wouldn't happen. But one thing, we've got to keep making it better, right? Ask yourself the question: if I'm involved, am I making it better than if I wasn't involved? Or someone else doing it for me. I think if we all can say yes to that, then we can hold our heads up high and we can enjoy, be proud of the contribution we've made towards it on the journey. Ray, I push my luck again with time, mate. I always do with this. I say we'll be an hour or so, and I stretch you to your maximum time here. But just for the last 30 seconds, mate, any final thoughts or anything you want to say before we conclude this episode?
No, I can see why you wanted to make that a full episode as well, because it's something. And you know what? It would be interesting to get a number of stakeholders in the game and around that idea and that topic, and maybe there has been stuff that's been piloted or looked at, or because I'm sure there's people at the top of their game here and in other countries, in France where Damien is, that are looking at this going, it's a problem, but we're just sitting on the problem, and we're just kind of keeping everything in the suitcase a little bit by sitting on it. Then it'd be really interesting to hear their thoughts on it as well. It's
I hope there
difficult,
are. I don't think. We don't ever hear it discussed, but I hope there are. But it'd be great. But then maybe if we can, if you don't mind, we'll either get Damien back on a call or something at some point, and we'll do a bit of a deeper dive into this one as well. But all three questions were great. Laurie's, Damien's, and Zane's, all great questions and different stuff to talk about, right? Which is quite nice.
And the thing is, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not one of those people we're talking about, because you're probably stretching and challenging yourself. And the people who pick up my books and my work and all that sort of stuff, they're probably the ones that end up in those rooms are not the ones you want in the rooms in many ways. You know what I mean? Yeah. The ones you really want are the outlier ones.
Can I ask just quickly, people listening, if you're out there now and you've got a view on this, drop us a quick email. Not because we want just email's sake. I'm desperate to find out if this is just a me problem in my head, or is people feeling the same thing, and say, Scott, no, you're wrong. It's fantastic. Everything's great. Or actually, it's okay, but so it doesn't need to be improved. Or actually, do you know what? It is pretty bad. We need to look at this. I'd love to get a bit of a sense check from different areas and places of how things are, and then maybe we can look at this in a bit more detail if there is, depending on what comes back from that. So drop us an email, or if you can, or a message, or whatever, and let us know what your experience is.
I think so. I think that's a no-brainer, actually. Yeah.
Cool. Ray, thank you so much. Like I said, I push my luck this time like I always do, mate. I'm looking forward to having you on for the next episode. I'll be on time next time, I promise you, and get you away on time. But thank you so much. They really enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, loved it. Thanks to the guys who sent in their voice notes as well. It's a little bit uncomfortable doing that, but yeah, brilliant.
It's excellent. Yeah, brilliant. All right, Ray, we'll have a great week. Enjoy the World Cup semis and the final, and I look forward to catching up in a week or so.
Cheers, Scott. Mind yourself.
Cheers, mate. Bye. This episode was brought to you in association with our friends at Soccer Coach Weekly. Established since 2006, Soccer Coach Weekly is a leading source of inspiration and advice for all grassroots coaches. Join thousands of youth soccer coaches just like you, saving time and effort in their goal of having the most effective, enjoyable and successful coaching journey for them and their players. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode.